Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another of our chapter from my life and book. And this evening we have Colin Babb, and it's going to be very interesting because we're going to be hearing about the glory days of West Indian cricket here in the UK. So I'm really looking forward to that. So Colin, how are you doing? Good to see you.
Great to meet you, Rudy, and some of your listeners may not be aware or will not be aware that the first time I met you was when I was interviewing Sam King, the late great Sam King for my first book. And you're one of the guys who helped to arrange that. And yeah, so you're connected to the first book in a very heavy, serious way.
Great. So Colin, tell us a bit about yourself. You grew up in England in the 1970s, and you got roots and heritage in Guyana, Barbados, and Guadeloupe.
That's correct. Yes, I grew up mainly in South London. When I left school, I kind of spread my wings and discovered different parts of the country for various reasons. And when I was a little bit older, I spent various parts of my life in various countries for other reasons. But essentially, my background is rooted in the Caribbean. My mother is Guyanese. My father is from Barbados. And the Guadeloupean connection comes from my maternal grandfather, who married a lady from Guadeloupe and settled there for many years. And therefore, Guadeloupe is part of our family base in the Caribbean. And I've been there many times. And also we have lots of Guadeloupean family in France. So yeah, basically I was a 70s child in a way. I had a 70s British childhood. And in the late 70s, I find myself in Barbados, the first time in the Caribbean, and then went to the Caribbean regularly for many years, and then stopped for some years. And then in the last 15 to 20 years, I've been going back regularly again. Not just Barbados, Guadeloupe, and Guyana, but also Dominica, Antigua, Trinidad, St. Lucia, Cuba. I like to go to places in the Caribbean where I have no family for research reasons, for political reasons, personal interest, holiday. Yeah. I like to spread my wings. I always regard myself as pan-Caribbean, although essentially, when I grew up in England, I was surrounded mainly by Guyanese people because most of my family in England were Guyanese. My Bajan and Guadeloupean relatives were mainly living outside of the UK. So essentially, I was surrounded by a Guyanese community, really, in terms of the food I ate and the discussions I listened to when I was growing up and everything else.
Okay, so when did you first get the inspiration to write?
I think that came from primary school. For some reason, I can't really put my finger on it. I've always wanted to write about things. And I was fairly precocious as a kid, not seriously, but fairly. And I do remember that at primary school, my second primary school, where I spent many happy years, I created a newspaper for my class. It was called The Bugle. And it was just bits of colored paper, sellotaped together. And I would write articles about who scored how many goals in the playground, what your favorite football team is, what's your favorite band. The answers then would have been Mark Bolan or T-Rex or I don't know, something like that. And then what's your favorite team? Excuse me? Yeah, exactly. What's it? Yeah, favorite footballer, George Best, or in Clyde Best, because for many West Indian kids at school, Clyde Best was a bit of a hero. He actually has Bajan roots, interestingly. Not many people know that.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, and obviously who fought who in the playground. If there was an odd scrap, I'd write about it. So yeah, and then from there, I had this desire to. When I got to secondary school, I was obsessed with music, so I wanted to become a music journalist. And then after that, I got a bit older, a bit more serious, and I wanted to think and write about news and current affairs. And at some point in my life, I ended up at the BBC, working for BBC World Service. But yeah, I think it was from primary school, really, that desire came.
Of course. So what is it that fascinates you about the connection with cricket and the Caribbean community here in the UK?
Basically, it's how I expressed my sense of being Caribbean as a young man, because, as I said, I didn't get to the West Indies until my late 70s, until I was at secondary school. So up to that point, I was living in England. Obviously, I was surrounded by a Caribbean family, especially a Guyanese family. But for me, cricket gave me a way of expressing my sense of being West Indian by watching a team which, at that time, during the early 70s, wasn't doing that well. So for me, it wasn't about the success. It was about a team that represented us. And when that team came over in 73, they had not won a test series for 4 to 5 to 6 years. So while the conversation about West Indies cricket has recently been about the glory years of Lloyd and Richards, there's a lot more to that history, which goes back to the 50s and the 60s in this country. Even when the West Indies team wasn't doing as well, there's always been that bond. It's not just about, you know, blackwash and beating England 5-0 in England on tour here. There's a lot more to it. And that's what was my connection with West Indies cricket, seeing this team on television, because my access to cricket was on BBC TV, when you could watch test matches for free. I know if you're a younger person now, you would not believe that. But yeah, we used to watch TV together. It was a very family thing. We watched the test matches together on television during the summer holidays, especially if the West Indies were here. And it was a very noisy affair. You know, everybody was jumping and shouting and cheering the team on as much as the crowds were in the stadiums. It was very much a very important TV event. Just like other things were, Top of the Pops, the Eurovision Song Contest and such like.
But there was also the talk in work and in social settings as well. I think that was very important at the time.
Yeah, cricket was, you got it right. Cricket was always a conversation. When I was growing up, there were 3 or 4 things always spoken about by the older people in the house when I was younger. And I subconsciously drew these things into my mind. One was politics. The adults, the grown-ups, are always talking about the politics. And of course, in Guyana, the political situation was volatile. When is it not volatile? I may add. But that was important. Then it was always a thing about home. Home was Guyana or Barbados. So the conversation was home, this happened. Back home, this happened. Then a letter. You remember when a letter would arrive and one of the older relatives would open the letter, an airmail letter, and talk about who dead, who doing this, who's gone to Canada. And so while all this was going on, cricket was also very important to me, because people talked about cricket a lot. There were, you know, in reverential terms, people like Walcott and Worrell and Kanhai and Solomon and Ramadan and Valentine, they were talked about almost in terms of Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, you know.
They were great ambassadors as well.
Yeah, they were great ambassadors, but they're almost, at that time, even then I sensed that cricketers were the people we were proud of.
Yeah.
Not the politicians, not so much, maybe some of the musicians in some ways, or people locally who did great things, but it was all about the cricketers. They were our international ambassadors. Sir Frank Worrell, the first black captain of the West Indies in the early 60s, was presidential.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think that the cricketers now have that gravitas because of different things that have been happening over the years. And, you know, when people talked about these cricketers, they talked about it in these terms. Gary Sobers was Pele, Maradona, and everything rolled into one. As a personality, he could do everything. He could bat, he could bowl, he could field. And obviously with my dad being from Barbados, you know, how sectarian cricket can be in the Caribbean. And this is something I need to mention, that for people living here, cricket had a different relationship compared to people in the Caribbean, because if you went to Port of Spain, most of the crowd would be Trinidadians when the West Indies were playing. In Georgetown, most of the crowd would be Guyanese. If you went to Sabina Park in Kingston, most of the crowd would be Jamaican. But in Britain, things were a little different, because you had people here from different parts of the Caribbean, often meeting each other for the very first time. You could not guarantee someone from Montserrat would have met somebody from Guyana unless they had come to Britain, for example. So people came together, and it was a sense of unifying everybody, because let's face it, if you're Grenadian, it doesn't mean you would like somebody from Trinidad. right? If you're from St. Lucia, it didn't mean you would necessarily get on with a Jamaican. But for the 5 days of a test match in England, generally, although there were arguments about how many people were being picked from each island, of course, generally, people would come together. So in a way, cricket was a kind of a glue that pulled us together.
It was a point of unity. You mentioned a couple of players there. I must say as well, Gary Sobers was a brilliant domino player as well as I must mention that. But
dominoes and cricket, that was certainly a 70s combination growing up in my house. Yeah.
Exactly. So who else were your favourite West Indian cricketers and why?
I think I have to be a bit sectarian here. I mean, I grew up in a Guyanese household, so Rohan Kanhai, Roy Fredericks, Lance Gibbs, people like that were big heroes of mine, and a lot of players who I didn't see but had heard of, like Colin Griffith. I always heard of those two bowlers, the fast bowlers, and I only saw them when in the 70s when I was able to watch TV clips of them. So yeah, I mean, the swagger of Vivian Richards, of course, for me that was a bit later for me. But I would suppose Kanhai and Lloyd for his leadership qualities, and Kanhai for his leadership qualities, and also the fact he was Guyanese, and also for the fact that Rohan Kanhai was the first West Indian of direct Indian ancestry to captain the West Indies. And that was very important to me. And I write about that in 1973 when he was captain of the 1973 team, because I'm talking about my favorite players, but I'm again back to that idea of representation. What the West Indies represented was a very cosmopolitan team, people from different races and different backgrounds in the Caribbean coming together. Now, if outside of the Caribbean, many people I know when I've traveled abroad are a bit confused about how someone like Alvin Kalacharan can play for the West Indies, unaware of the Indian diaspora in the Caribbean. So, you know, and Steve Camacho of Portuguese ancestry, although that's been updated with Josh De Silva from Trinidad, the wicketkeeper of Portuguese ancestry, who played very well recently. So the team represented people from different backgrounds coming together, different races. And it wasn't all about the great players that I liked. It was about the team coming together and what it represented. Also, it wasn't just about West Indian players. I liked players from different countries. I liked Derek Underwood, the slow bowler. I always wanted to be Derek Underwood, bowling slowly and deadly. Dennis Lilly. I love Dennis Lilly, you know, with the fiery with the tash and everything like that. You know, so there are other players I like. Zahir Abbas, who wore glasses. He played for Pakistan, scored a great 200 in the 70s. I remember watching that on television. So it wasn't just about West Indian players. It was about what West India's team represented, but I liked other players as well.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, Clive Lloyd, but he also then went on to do a lot of good work here in London in terms of community development, parts of, you know, some major projects and supporting, obviously, cricket competitions within the UK.
Yeah, the Clive Lloyd Cup, yeah. But he also actually lived in the Northwest as well, and did a lot of work up there because he played for Lancashire. And interestingly, this is something I like to say, is that it wasn't just about watching the West Indies play on TV or going to the Oval or wherever to watch them play, which I did. There used to be a cricket program every Sunday called the John Player League. I've no idea whether anybody here can remember it, who's tuning in now. That was a 40-over competition every Sunday on BBC Two. And you could watch that. And
John Arlott commentated, didn't he?
John Arlott, the great John Arlott, yeah. Well, we're talking about great players. I also want to talk about great commentators. John Arlott, Richie Benaud, Jim Laker.
The umpires.
Yeah, Dickie Bird, who actually, strangely enough, Dickie Bird is a semi-god with a lot of older West Indian men. I don't know why, but there's something about Dickie Bird that a lot of older West Indian men always admired. And my dad, when he used to watch cricket sometimes, I can still hear him now. If Dickie Bird didn't give a decision in favour of a West Indian bowler, he'd say at the TV, "Come on, Dickie!" imploring Dickie Bird to give the decision the right way. But I interviewed Dickie Bird for my last book and the book before on the phone. Luckily, a mutual friend arranged it. And so, you know, again, it's not just about West Indians, it's about people from different backgrounds contributing to my memories of growing up in the 70s.
Absolutely. So do you have any other writing projects in the pipeline?
Well, I've had conversations with two former West Indian cricketers about writing their biographies. We're at the very early stages in that conversation. Also, I need to find the time to do these things. I've got one or two other ideas. One is actually to write about the history of the Caribbean community in Britain and the Eurovision Song Contest. Unusual approach, you may think, but the idea is try and find all the Caribbean musicians who have represented the UK in the Eurovision Song Contest and talk about that culture of watching Eurovision, which in every single Caribbean family I grew up with in the 70s was crucial and important. We can still remember when ABBA won in Waterloo in 1974 with the sort of sprinkly of glitter on the faces of the two singers, you know.
Channels were a bit limited as well in that.
Yeah, there was less choice. But anyway, that's another idea. I've got another idea of writing about football violence and black football hooligans, of which there were quite a few in the 70s, but I won't go into that now.
Yeah, and just finally on this, and I'm going to come to Brian and Josh in particular after this, is next year is Windrush 75. So I just wondered whether you'd be doing anything special, because obviously that's a major milestone.
Yeah.
The community here in the UK. So just a thought.
Well, next year is actually, 2003, so it's a major year compared to 1973 when the tour was written. But generally, my books, or my recent books, are about that connection, how important it was, and what it meant to the community here, and also what it meant to people who weren't Caribbean, because there are many people who felt connected to the West Indies team. But what the West Indies team does for me is I can go anywhere in the world, and as soon as I mention West Indies cricket, that they make a connection with the Caribbean, particularly if you go to Commonwealth countries.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and also just one more thing, Tony Cozier from Barbados, the commentator. Another thing I loved about cricket, and I've written in the book, is the fact that Tony Cozier, through cricket, he was able to reach out and connect with people and say that there are people here from the Caribbean, from European heritage, with European heritage, and just to explain once again to people how cosmopolitan our region is. Cricket does a lot of that because it pushes those faces out.
Great. Thanks for that. Brian, is there anything that you'd like to put to Colin from your memories?
You have to unmute himself first.
Yeah. You can unmute.
No, I just find it really fascinating. I haven't got any many questions, but it just goes back to another, as I was saying to you before, Rudy, about a bygone age, because I would have been 10 when that 73 Test series. So I remember it was the first. I know England played Australia, but that was the first year I really remembered. Football was my game, but cricket series was the first one I remember watching on BBC with every 40 minutes you'd have Jim Laker and Richie Benner. One was saying, "Think Jim," or but it was every 40 minutes. It's just the two of them. Now there's about 102 at any Test match. That's fine.
You don't need all those graphics and anything. You just want two people talking about the game, don't you?
Well, Richie Benner used to introduce the programme, do the interviews, do the highlights. You wonder whether he had his white blazer on, the blue one or pink one, and he must be thinking, "I've been here all day. What else do they want of me?" But it was just the two of them. It's just great to watch.
It's funny you should talk about football, because up to that point, I was mainly a football fan. I still am in a way, although not as passionate as I was before. A little bit more happy that the fact that the team I supported didn't get relegated yesterday. But I support Leeds United, and I got into Leeds through and I spent anyway, we won't get into the seriousness of all this, but I was into football in a big way. My first match I saw was Leeds v Chelsea in the 1970 Cup final. First match I remember, and it was the 1973 tour under John Player League, which challenged my love of cricket, my love of football. It was that which competed with football and ran alongside it. So for me on a Sunday, it was, oh dear, the big match or the John Player League, very serious decision. So I opted to go to a match today on the Saturday, a John Player League on the Sunday, to balance my interest, which the reason.
Excellent. So Josh, interested in your perspective.
Yeah, it's such an interesting subject, and the fact that sport can have such an impact on people's identity and their sense of who they are and the sense of their community. Because sometimes I think we think about politics, and politics is about people making speeches and things and passing laws, but sport and other things have a really important impact on people's lives and how they see themselves, just in a way that politics does. And I mean, obviously, that growing up in a colonial society in the Caribbean, and I would have thought, I don't know, but I've studied the British Empire in Asia and in Singapore especially, and initially cricket was a whites only sport, and it was only eventually that non-whites were allowed to play cricket, and then eventually non-whites were allowed to actually play the whites at cricket. And although cricket was seen as a sport, a way of sort of like demonstrating the superiority of white and British values, also things like fair play that you get in cricket, and it's not cricket, old boy, these also undermine this idea of British superiority, because it's like like with the blackwash.
In the end, it was about competition, teamwork, who's stronger, better on the day.
Can I just say one thing? Just makes a very interesting point about how in the Caribbean, cricket was divided in terms of the social classes and races. Because what happened was, although it was brought to the Caribbean by the British and played mainly by British soldiers, in fact, it was a recreational sport for the soldiers as well as the plantocracy. What happened was that cricket became segregated along different racial lines in the Caribbean. So, for example, in Guyana and Trinidad in particular, you had clubs created by the Indian diaspora for the Indian diaspora. You're right. You had Portuguese clubs, you had Indian clubs, and within Black Caribbean society, you had divisions where middle-class blacks had their club, but lower-class blacks had their club. People of lighter complexions, the professional mulatto middle classes had their club. And even in white society, there was the higher echelons and the lower echelons. It didn't always didn't always mix. Yeah,
it reflected the social order. That's
exactly the social and the racial order. It wasn't
that's just a reality. It was a reflection of the social.
Yeah, so it wasn't simply a black and white thing. There were all kinds of stratas and divisions all across the Caribbean.
But I think what's interesting is, as you say, Rudy, it reflects the social order, but it also undermines the social order, because then you could have a team from the poor part of town beating the toffs.
Exactly.
Yeah. One of the interesting things about cricket in that way is that, for me personally, and also for a lot of West Indians I knew growing up in the 70s, it wasn't just about beating England. We just wanted to beat everybody. We wanted to beat Australia as much, if not more, than England, especially the damage that Lillian Thompson did to the West Indians in 75, in the mid-70s. So for me growing up, one of the most disappointing days in my sporting life was when the West Indies lost to India in the 83 World Cup. We could not imagine that India could come anywhere near to beating us
in that
competition.
West Indians.
Now, of course, it was. I'd actually collapse if England, if West Indies beat India in the series. So it shows how things have changed over the years.
Interesting. It's quite a deep subject if you want to go that deep.
But cricket means a lot to me in many ways. But also, what I write about is a sense of growing up in the 70s. It wasn't all good. It wasn't all bad. Cricket was part of that. And in 1973 and Me, which you can get from colinbabbauthor.com, Just thought I'd get that in. ColinBabbAuthor.com, just in case you didn't hear the first time round.
And that was going to be my last question.
I'm sorry, yeah, I beat you to it. I beat you to it. Yeah, the revised and updated edition is available.
Excellent.
But it's not just about cricket, it's about growing up, it's about family, it's about nostalgia. And also some of the people who have contributed to the book aren't West Indian. Some of them are English. Just talking about that time, talking about that tour, talking about that era, and all the different connections that were made there. And I was very fortunate that I got Dennis Amos, Dickie Bird, Alvin Kallicharran, Lance Gibbs, Maurice Foster, you know, great ex-players who played in that tour to speak to me and give up their time, and various other people, Reds Pereira, the great commentator from Guyana, and other people as well. And also people who were actually at those matches in '73. Some of them are still alive.
Yeah,
and they spoke to me.
It would be great for next year, going back to my earlier point, as it's Windrush 75, if you were able to do something about, you know,
well, just
those players from 73. I mean,
drag me
about
along.
50 years.
Yeah.
We were talking earlier on about this 50 years. Those of us who remember, that's
a
couple of lifetimes now.
I know, but again, as I said, cricket's the baseline for the book, but a lot of it is about television, how people came together to watch one thing, whether it's a cricket match, a football match, Eurovision Song Contest, Richard Nixon resigning. I remember watching that even now today. So the idea is of people coming together to watch one thing on one channel, on one TV. And I think that idea of watching TV is something I write about.
And of course, radio is a powerful medium as well. I mean,
yeah, of course, yeah.
It came to,
you know, people used to listen to the cricket and watch it on TV at the same time. I can't remember whether that's was in sync or not, but it was something that I think we tried to do. I think my dad used to do that now and again.
Yeah. And
if the cricket got boring on the TV, I might go into my room and drag the transistor radio up there. And then if something happened, I'd run into the living room and watch something, watch it all happen again. Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, a lot of it is nostalgia wrapped up with cricket memories. But again, it's about how one team unified a diaspora community who were not always unified themselves. And you must remember, if you're from Montserrat, St. Lucia, until Viv Richards and Andy Roberts, Antigua, Dominica, you weren't represented. None of these, but yet, from my memory, most people from those islands still supported the West Indies, although they weren't always happy that their players were not there.
Of course. Right. So, as we come to a close, can you tell us once again where the book people can get the book? Where can they follow you, and your website details?
You can get the updated version of 1973 and Me by me, Colin Babb, from colinbabbauthor.com in the first instance, which is actually my website. My Twitter feed is @GaveTheCrowd, and Colin Babb Author is my Instagram. So yeah, just get in touch if you are inspired to after this fantastic conversation. And also, I just want to mention I'm involved with quite a few other people in an event in Guyana at the Arthur Chong Center. It's a diversity coming together healing event to bring together all the different people in Guyana together in one event. 25th of June at the Arthur Chong Center. And it would be a Zoom event as well as in person as well. So yeah.
Right. So thank you very much for that. And thank you very much, everybody. That was another edition of A Chapter from My Life and Book, and look forward to seeing you again very soon. Thank you and good night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.